And you're live, sir.
It's 5:05 and welcome into a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. The North Carolina House Commerce Committee as well as the Senate Judiciary Committee both advanced pieces of legislation yesterday that target homeowners associations, HOAs. The bill aims to provide additional protection for homeowners by enhancing transparency, limiting fines, and curbing abusive foreclosure practices. Fueled by legislature's own frustration with HOAs, the bill aims to curb abusive practices among the state's more than 14,000 homeowners associations that exist. Bill sponsor Representative Frank Eiler, the Republican out of Brunswick County, said, quote, "I've been told by the opposition that of the 14,000 homeowners associations in North Carolina, 95% of people are happy with them. Well, 5% of 14,000 is still 700, so I hope we can take action for the bad actors, brought back to the good actors." Legislators approved House Bill 444 in the House Commerce Committee and Senate Bill 378 in the Senate Judiciary Committee. The companion bills mirror legislation from previous years. The legislation would cap daily fines at $100 within an HOA, with a maximum of $2,500 overall. They would ban retroactive rule changes and require mediation before most lawsuits between a homeowners association and residents living under the HOA. State Senator Benton Sawyer, the Republican out of Johnson County, called it a property rights protection bill and the most sweeping legislation that we've seen in some time with respect to HOAs in this chamber. The legislation also mandates budget transparency, restricts foreclosures until unpaid dues reach 6 months or $2,500, and directs the North Carolina Department of Justice to track homeowner complaints against their own HOAs. The bill also bans management companies from profiting from fine collection, ensuring that there is no profit motive in enforcement. Representative Ya Lu, the Democrat out of Wake County, said this bill makes targeted reforms to how homeowners associations operate in North Carolina. These changes promote fairness, transparency, and accountability for both homeowners and associations. So some bipartisan support there. State Representative John Bluss, the Republican out of Guilford County, expressed frustration with his own HOA, adding that he's looking into options to altogether abolish HOAs across North Carolina. He told lawmakers, I've been so distraught with my homeowners association. I've actually looked out and tried to see, can we do something to where you can get rid of them? And the problem, as I'm told, is constitutionality. These are restrictions in your deed. These are these are things in deeds, and unless you've got a 100% homeowner to agree, you really can't do anything to get rid of them. Additionally, the bill directs the North Carolina DOJ to track those homeowner complaints against the HOAs, saying, quote, "We are just asking them to compile a report and report back to the legislature." The bill sponsors noted that the potential need for future appropriations to actually get HOAs to take action. Both bills are now scheduled to go to their respective rule committees. Pretty much after the rule committee, they will make their way to the House and the Senate, both bills, for a full-on vote. HOAs, a very controversial thing across the state of North Carolina and most of the United States as well. We'll keep an eye on both of these pieces of legislation. You can read some additional details this morning on House Bill 444 and Senate Bill 378 by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com, where it's now 5:09, News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. We continue to follow a lot of legislation out of the North Carolina General Assembly. However, this morning we turn to a very interesting discussion out of the GA. We're talking about raw milk. To get some details on that this morning, Katie Zender, carolinajournal.com, joins us on the News Hour. Katie, I can't imagine when many folks think about some of the ongoings in Raleigh, they're thinking that lawmakers are having a heated debate over raw milk consumption, but in fact they are. What's the latest that you're learning this morning?
Exactly, Nick. Good morning. Right, so there's a bill currently in the House that has brought up a lot of controversy, both inside the legislature and outside it. So House Bill 609 would amend the current language under North Carolina law. Current law in North Carolina, um, the sale of raw milk is illegal in North Carolina under current law. But this bill, if it is passed, would amend the language allowing for the sale of raw milk in North Carolina. So House Bill 609 is sponsored by Representatives Matthew Winslow, Dennis Rydell, Jay Adams, and Jeffrey McNeely. Adams told the Carolina Journal, "We raised our kids on raw milk and they are very healthy adults now." However, the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, or NCDA and CS, firmly stands in opposition to this bill.
Yeah, it's a very interesting debate and discussion that's taking place in Raleigh as it relates to this. And Katie, having listened to some of the discussion and seen, and you talked about the public comment, there's been a lot of social media reaction to something like this. I guess I'll admit I didn't realize raw milk was such a popular issue, but it has, and it seems to have sparked conversation on both sides of the political aisle. What are some of the arguments for and against that you're hearing this morning?
Right. So obviously, with the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, their division, the Food and Drug Protection Division, has a lot of health concerns about the sale of raw milk. It can contain a lot of harmful bacteria, including Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria, and a couple of other bacteria that can cause serious illness. They can cause death, stillborn, stillborn youth or stillborn babies, problems in pregnancy. Problems with weakened immune systems, such as in the elderly, infants, children. So it can cause a lot of health issues in different demographics. So there's really a lot of health concerns. That's the main issue with the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. That's their main opposition against it. Donald Bryson here at the John Locke Foundation, he's the CEO, really supports this bill. He says North Carolina law already permits the personal consumption of raw milk through herd share agreements. So herd share agreements are one caveat that under North Carolina law that people can actually consume raw milk personally. And a herd share agreement is where you have partial ownership of a cow or a goat or something like that. And so if you have ownership of that, then it's legal to consume that raw milk through a herd share. So that's one of the caveats. But there's also a caveat, or not a caveat, a section under the current North Carolina Farm Bill that's currently going through committees right now that would actually amend that language as well, that would prohibit the consumption of raw milk, even under herd share agreements and caveats like that. So Bryson said, legislators do not get to decide whether raw milk exists in North Carolina because it already does. They must decide whether to continue pushing it underground or create a legal monitored framework for its sale. So he has a whole op-ed on this up that people can go and check out and read his full argument. But yeah, so one of the main arguments, not only by Bryson, but by a lot of legislatures, is that we don't, ban the sale of, raw seafood, raw steak, even bagged lettuce. There's a 2013 study from the CDC that says that leafy greens and bagged lettuce is one of the leading causes of foodborne illnesses, but yet we're not prohibiting the sale of these things. So there's really a lot of irony in this logic and the arguments that they're putting to prohibiting the sale of raw milk.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up the herd share part of this. As I understand it, Katie, if some of this was to move forward, specifically in the North Carolina Farm Bill, individuals that own dairy cows and have them on their own property would not legally be able to consume the product from their own cow. I mean, the idea that would be rolling out in North Carolina seems almost completely absurd.
That's exactly right, Nick. And so, yeah, that's the current language as laid out in the North Carolina Farm Bill that's currently going through committees. So if that passes, that would prohibit the personal consumption of these people that own, dairy cows, goats, things like that.
I did have the opportunity to listen to some comments about the North Carolina Farm Bill. Many farmers spoke in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday. And Katie, you and I have talked about this in the past, especially small family farms. They indicated that the possibility of them to sell their product in small batch, of course, to neighbors and family members and other individuals could be a pretty significant revenue source for them. And as you mentioned with the Farm Bill, it would almost completely cut that out. This House legislation would allow some of it. Seems like it could be a big deal, especially for these very small rural farms across North Carolina.
That's exactly right, Nick. And this is another argument that Bryson makes in his op-ed, is he points out that legalizing the sale of raw milk would really provide an economic opportunity for these farmers. And this is really significant considering the timing, because a lot of these farmers, especially the smaller farmers, are facing significant economic repercussions because of the tariffs and the ensuing trade war that we're currently experiencing here.
Absolutely, and you've been walking us through that over the last couple of weeks. Katie's going to keep an eye on the milk debate in the North Carolina General Assembly. We appreciate her time this morning. Katie Zender joins us on the Carolina Journal News Hour. Where it's now 5:15, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. It's time to get a look at traffic on your Wednesday morning. A look at the roadways with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. Good. And you're live.
21 minutes past the hour. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. We are tracking details this morning out of the North Carolina Council of State. That is where statewide elected officials, including people like the labor commissioner, the auditor, and the governor, sit down once a month and provide updates around what is going on in their various state agencies. And at yesterday's meeting, North Carolina Labor Commissioner Luke Farley said that he would file an amicus brief over a ruling that a three-judge panel made last month that initially blocked the North Carolina General Assembly's plan to shift oversight of the North Carolina State Board of Elections to State Auditor Dave Bolick, calling it an existential threat to the future of the Council of State. Farley made the statement at Tuesday's meeting. He also made a similar statement when the decision was handed down. A Superior Court panel was split 2-1 in supporting Governor Josh Stein's lawsuit against the planned election administration changes. Just 1 week later, the North Carolina Court of Appeals blocked the ruling, favoring Stein, a Democrat, in his legal battle with state legislative leaders, and Bolick, a Republican, over election board appointments. This paved the way for Bolick to announce last week his appointments to the State Board of Election on the actual deadline, May the 1st. Those folks are set to be sworn in today at a State Board of Election meeting, along with a brand new executive director of the state board. Farley, who has practiced law for 14 years, told those attending the Council of State meeting yesterday that he felt compelled to talk about the initial Superior Court ruling because it had plunged him into a, quote, constitutional crisis. He said that the ruling goes beyond who appoints those on the State Board of Election and raises serious questions whether there should be and will be a meaningful Council of State, or if the 9 members, excluding the governor, will just be a group of figureheads. Farley told the council this: Article 3, Section 5.4 of our state constitution says that the governor shall take care that the law be faithfully executed, and that is truly enough. The problem is that the majority interpreted that provision to mean only the governor can execute law, and that interpretation doesn't square with the rest of the Constitution. 2 provisions in particular areas under Article 3 say that the General Assembly is empowered to establish the duties of the 9 other members of the Council of State. And another section of Article 3 says that the General Assembly has authority to reorganize the entire executive branch as it sees fit. Proper constitutional interpretation should give effect to each and every clause and provision of the document, and the only way to read all of that is those provisions in harmony is for the General Assembly to be able to assign duty to any member of the Council of State as long as it's not already specifically assigned to the governor in the Constitution, end quote there from Commissioner Farley. He gave the example that the General Assembly can make the auditor the head of the Board of Elections, but not the Commander-in-Chief of the National Guard, because that is specifically reserved to the governor in the Constitution. He says now, if you accept the reasoning of the majority of the 3-judge panel, the General Assembly cannot assign any executive function to any member of the Council of State besides the governor without violating the Constitution. He told his colleagues, quote, frankly, that is an absurd conclusion. Why would the people of this state have created 9 independently elected executive officers only so that they could not be assigned any duties to perform? That just doesn't make any sense. He went on to say that everyone at the table was independently elected and chosen by people to lead an executive agency. Farley gave the vote totals for himself, Secretary of State Elaine Marshall, Commissioner of Agriculture Steve Troxler, and Bolick, and said that the people of North Carolina had the opportunity to choose them for their respective offices, regardless of which party they belong to. Farley said, quote, I'm speaking up about this today because I'm intensely concerned about the will of the people being upheld. If the decision of the 3-judge panel were allowed to stand, what does that mean for every duty or responsibility that has been entrusted to each of us in our departments? We each independently run our own respective state agencies and represent the people who elected us doing so. And then why are we even called here today for a vote if we don't exercise independent executive authority? We are not sitting around this table as a panel of advisors, but as equals, with each having a vote at the table. He said that he was in fact going to be filing an amicus brief on the case's merits, specifically focusing on the role of the Council of State and their status as independent officers of the executive branch, which is a perspective he thinks that the court needs to hear. Excluding Stein, Farley invited the remaining 8 members to join the amicus brief to protect the Council of State as those who wrote the state's constitution intended. However, Governor Josh Stein, disagreeing with Farley's assessment of everything going on. According to Stein, after the meeting, he said, quote, "The oversight of elections has been with the governor since the state's inception. There's not a state in the country where the auditor is the one responsible for every single election. This was simply a partisan move by the General Assembly to take power from the democratically elected governor. By the way," he said, "how many votes everyone earned in the last election? I think I got the most, and people knew who I was and elected me to do a job as governor. And that is why I disagree and have appealed to the state Supreme Court about the Court of Appeals' wrong-headed decision." Stein said that there was no urgency for the Court of Appeals to eliminate the stay, as the only sitting thing being considered was the Supreme Court justice election between Allison Riggs and Jefferson Griffin. Stein noting, quote, "So it made me wonder what this panel was doing in order to favor their colleague Jefferson Griffin. Of course, my sense of alarm has been since brought forward in large measure by what the U.S. District Judge Richard Myers did yesterday. I want to congratulate Justice Riggs on winning the race for, I think, the 3rd or 4th time now, and I look forward to her continued service on the Supreme Court." Now, for the most part, Council of State meetings typically do not get into any incredibly heated detail or discussion. It's more than anything else just an update from all of the various state-level entities that are represented by the Council of State. However, Commissioner Luke Farley really teeing off yesterday on protecting these independent 9 positions that do appear on state-run ballots, or statewide ballots, I should say, every 4 years. You can read some additional comments from Commissioner Farley, and so we've got some other links this morning as it relates to this discussion over power by visiting our website, carolinajournal.com, where it's now 5:29, News Talk 1110, 99.3 WBT. Time to get another look at the roadways on your Wednesday morning, a look at traffic with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Dick, and cruising.
It's 5:36. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. I'm Nick Craig. Good morning to you. It is Wednesday, May the 7th. Today is officially the deadline for Real ID. The Real ID Act begins today across the United States of America, and it does require individuals to have a Real ID, U.S. passport, or other federally approved identification to board commercial domestic flights and enter a federally secured building. Travelers without Real ID can still board commercial flights in the United States, but with extra steps, according to the Department of Homeland Security. The NCDMV says that there is no rush to get a Real ID unless you have an upcoming trip. They will continue to issue Real IDs in perpetuity going forward, so you'll still be able to get appointments if you're lucky enough to actually do that. To see if you already or currently have a Real ID, you'll notice a star on the upper right-hand corner of your driver's license. If you do not see that star, then you currently just have a regular North Carolina driver's license. According to Dan Velez, a spokesperson with the Transportation Security Administration, TSA, the Real ID enforcement date is just that. People can still get Real IDs after the deadline. He says it's an enforcement date where, starting today, we will enforce Real ID at security checkpoints. It's not a Real ID deadline for everybody to get one. According to the TSA, about 81% of license holders nationwide have already gone through the process to get their Real ID, and passengers without Real ID or other acceptable forms could expect some significant delays if they are trying to fly via the air. Additional screening processes and procedures for those that do not have Real IDs. This has, of course, been a big-time discussion in North Carolina because there has been very long lines at the North Carolina Division of Motor Vehicle for locations for months now, as many folks are waiting 3, 6, 8 months to get DMV appointments. Over the last couple of weeks, DMV has tried to cut down on recent waiting times, expanding hours at 42 DMV locations so that most DMV offices in the state are open 10 hours a day. However, even with some of these extensions in time, long wait lines have persisted, and those could continue to get worse with this deadline now officially taking place. Here's what you need to know about a Real ID. It looks very similar to a traditional driver's license, but has that star in the top right-hand corner, and the process to getting one is similar to obtaining a regular driver's license. To upgrade your regular driver's license to a Real ID, first, probably the hardest part is going to be getting that appointment with a local DMV office, is one document with a person's full name that provides their identity and date of birth. A current North Carolina driver's license is valid enough for that. One document confirming their social security number, things like a social security card, a 1099, a W-2 tax form from your employer, suffices that document parameter from DMV, and two documents proving and providing that you are a North Carolina resident with a current physical address. This can be a local tax bill, other forms of bills and documents that have your current physical address as well as your name assigned on it, as well as one document providing liability insurance coverage from a provider licensed to do business in North Carolina. For most individuals, that is going to be your vehicle insurance that you've got through North Carolina here in the state. So those are the four prerequisites of the things that you need. It is noted that if a person has had their legal name changed, such as taking a married name, additional documents may be needed to verify that name change as well if you are heading to the DMV. To the credit of NCDMV, they do have a very lengthy page on their website explaining the process of obtaining a Real ID. They give examples of all of the valid forms of documents that can be brought to your local office in the process of getting a Real ID. Again, the biggest problem this morning continues to be getting a appointment, as many folks are told that the closest DMV office is hundreds of miles away from them. As it does stand right now, up until noon at DMV offices, that is when there are scheduled appointments that can be taken online. From noon until close is when walk-up appointments are allowed, so your best bet may be to head to a local DMV office sometime in the mid or early afternoon hours and try and get an appointment that way. The Real ID deadline, again, does take place today. So if you do have a domestic flight coming up and do not have a Real ID, make sure you're bringing your passport so that you can get through security. Turning our attention to some other statewide news this morning, the North Carolina House of Representatives is prepared to pass legislation to make ivermectin available over the counter following national controversy regarding the drug during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Ivermectin Access Act passed both the House Judiciary Committee and the House Rules Committee yesterday, the final step before the bill can go to the House floor for a full chamber vote. Representative Jonathan Almanat of Cabarrus County said, quote, "This bill would allow pharmacists to dispense ivermectin without a prescription." He told his colleagues ivermectin has been around and it's a safe, affordable drug that was discovered back in the 1970s. It was approved for human use in 1987 and $50 billion doesn't have to be given worldwide. Almond added that to ivermectin, the active ingredient, that there is some active ingredients that are in ivermectin that also exist in Tylenol, and noted that Tylenol causes more emergency room visits, hospitalizations, and deaths annually than something as simple as that. Ivermectin has been regarded as a wonder drug and is today used as an anti-parasitic agent, an anti-cancer agent, and more, and developers won the Nobel Prize for the drug back in 2015. The act in the General Assembly this morning would enable pharmacists to give ivermectin over the counter, similar to other certain medicines like Sudafed and various other drugs that you're able to get legally in North Carolina. Representative Heather Ryan, the Republican out of Lincoln, who is also a pharmacist, said, quote, "It would work very similar to that. And I would add it would probably be a safer avenue to get this drug than how people are currently getting it." Ryan alluded to the fact that various formulations, typically more concentrated forms of ivermectin, are available at animal supply stores, and noted that during the COVID-19 pandemic, many sought the drug from such stores as a treatment option following viral reports of its efficiency and effective nature as it related to COVID-19. The controversy emerged as public health officials denounced its use, despite evidence of safe and effective human formations of it for COVID and other conditions. The FDA did have to go forward and settle a lawsuit last year over its social media posts against ivermectin. They were taken to court for that, and they did settle. North Carolina is one of 4 states that have an ivermectin bill currently going through the legislature right now. 3 states have already made it legal over the counter. So this is something that is likely to come forward in the coming weeks and months. We'll keep an eye on it right here on the Carolina Journal News Hour and, of course, on our website at carolinajournal.com, where it's now 5:44 in News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Another look at traffic this morning with Boomer Von Cannon.
Hey, thank you, Nick. And wait.
And you're live.
Good morning again. It's 5:52. Welcome back to the Carolina Journal News Hour. News Talk 1110 99.3 WBT. Turning our attention back to the legislature this morning. The North Carolina Senate over the last couple of days voted through a bill that would give local public school districts increased flexibility in setting their school calendars. Now, stick with me on this. It's a pretty important story. The measure passed with a bipartisan vote 39-7, with all Republicans supporting the bill and a very small portion of Democrats being against it. No members of the Senate package against it spoke against the bill. Under current school calendar rules, districts must start their academic year on the Monday closest to August the 26th and complete it by the Friday closest to June 11th. Senate Bill 754 offers an alternative schedule, allowing schools to begin the year as early as the Monday closest to August 19th and by the Friday that is the last Monday in the month of May. According to Senator Amy Galey, the Republican out of Alamance County, she said, quote, "This compromise will make a real difference for school districts across the state. It provides districts with additional flexibility to meet their local needs while also holding them accountable if they openly defy the law. That's why we've seen several local elected leaders from small and large school districts come out and support this bill." The measure does have some enforcement mechanisms. The bill mandates that North Carolina's Superintendent of Public Instruction report any violations of calendar law to the State Board of Education. If a district is found in violation, the board will direct the district to remedy the situation. If the district fails to do so, they risk a possibility of losing central office funding until corrections are made. That funding, of course, would be pulled from the state. The proposal also allows community members, including residents and business owners within a district, to file civil action against local school boards that disregard state law. State Senate Leader Phil Berger said it's time for us to put the school calendar debate to rest. Stakeholders have worked hard to find a workable proposal for students, families, and local businesses. I am proud to see this bill pass the Senate with bipartisan support. State Senator Michael Lee, who's also now as we covered just back a couple of weeks ago, now the Senate Majority Leader, said, quote, "For years, I've heard from local education leaders and business owners about the impacts of North Carolina's school calendar law, and it became clear that there was a pathway to address their concerns. Senate Bill 754 strikes the right balance between providing an alternative opening date for school districts and supporting our local businesses that rely on summer tourism." The measure now heads its way to the North Carolina House, and there really are two debates as it relates to school calendar flexibility. One is tourism for the busy, predominantly eastern half of the state that has the largest swell of individuals throughout the summer months, pushing the date of the school starting as far back into the month of August as possible is seen as a huge win for the tourism industry, which does generate billions of dollars a year for the state of North Carolina. However, with current calendar laws as they relate in North Carolina, there are some issues around the winter or Christmas break as it relates to standardized testing. Many schools, due to the previous regulation, which required them to start on that Monday close to August the 26th and the Friday, June 11th end date, forced many school districts to have their midterm standardized testings after spring or after the winter or Christmas break, making students retain information for the better part of 2 weeks before taking tests. And unfortunately for school districts, there was not a whole lot they could do under the current law. This new legislation would provide them that extra week of coverage and potentially allow them to adjust their calendars to keep some of that standardized testing as close to instruction time as possible. It has been a debate for many years, and as was noted by lawmakers, there are multiple school districts this year that are operating their school in defiance of North Carolina law as it relates to the school calendar and start and end dates. There is currently no teeth in the current legislation to hold those districts accountable. This new legislation, Senate Bill 754, would add some penalties to those school districts if they decide to fly openly in the face of this legislation. As I noted, it has passed the Senate in a 39-7 vote. The legislation now makes its way to the North Carolina House. Well, that's going to do it for a Wednesday edition of the Carolina Journal News Hour. WBT News is next, followed by Good Morning BT. We're back with you tomorrow morning, 5 to 6, right here on News Talk 1110 and 99.3 WBT.